Alright, in preparation to put this rear bearing cap on, I'm actually going to lube my bearings again. Let's put a little bit of lube in here just so that they aren't dry. And I got a bearing down in here. Okay, so next they want us to install this is the speedo gear. It drops on there, and I think those go that way. Okay, and then our shims. And now I need to put my gasket material back on here. Now this only goes one way. These aren't evenly spaced around. Key is this vent goes on the top. This thing's upside down, so the vent would go up here. We rotate that like this. Now that bearing is keeping it from just sliding back on there. It's got to be pressed on. We're going to actually use the yoke to press it on. But I think what it talks about is putting these in to get this lined up. Couple of these on, and then here's our new yoke. Remember, I'm going to go with a double cardan in the rear. This is the rear, so it needs a special yoke, so I'm not going to reuse the old yoke. I'm going to put this new yoke on, and we're going to use this surface right here and that bolt to actually press that bearing down where it needs to be. Okay, that's got us down far enough. We can now get these bolts. Let's put these on nice and tight. Alright, we're going to take these down to 35 foot-pounds. Alright, and the final thing we're going to do is we're going to tighten this down to 120 foot-pounds. You just realized that we didn't put any thread locker on these, so I'm going to real quick take these out one at a time, put thread locker on it, because I need to seal it. That's a through hole, and otherwise it's going to leak right there. Alright, after that first torque to 120 pounds, we thought we were perfect, but this was a little bit tight, and we had zero end play. So I was afraid we were actually too tight. So off camera, we actually took all of this back apart again, and you know, imagining that I was either at zero tolerance or even kind of, let's call it a negative zero. I was actually too tight. And the spec says it wants to be between 1 and 5 thousandths. We put in a 5.5 shim. That kit came with several extra shims, and we found one that was 5.5 thousandths. Put that in, put it all back together, tightened that back down to spec, and I've got a 1,000th end play now, and it's just perfect. So you know, that took a lot of effort actually to get that back apart. You had to clean all this sealing off and stuff. It's a pain in the butt, but anyway, super happy with that. So we're going to consider that one perfect, and we're going to move on. Alright, the next thing we're going to do is this little back area here. This is the back of the front output shaft, and we're going to install a race. This race here, actually kind of like a floating race. It sits in here, and it's allowed to kind of go in and out, and it does that based on these shims and this backing plate. The more shims you have, the more this can come out this direction, and the looser, the more end play we'll have here. Now, Interesting, again, this is the bottom of the transfer case, and this is so close to the bottom, and I think when I'm done, my oil level will be down in here and possibly up into here. And I think I remember there was a lot of oil leak out here. I saw where a previous person that I watched, they actually put sealant between each of these layers, and that's going to add thickness to this, which will give you too much end play, I think. So for this particular, for right now, I'm going to install these. These are the original ones that were on here. I'm going to install these back, hoping that that's the right end play. We'll put these back on. We're going to work on the front end, and if need be, if we need to add or remove some, we'll come back and try and figure out exactly how much. We may take a few of these out and put some sealant in here so that these don't leak. But for right now, we just want to get that pushed in. I'm going to get these in here. Okay, we got that done. Alright, now we're going to get this front output shaft support housing installed. Mine currently has these shift rails already in place. The books don't have that yet, so we got to deviate just a little bit. Went ahead and put sealer on that surface there. It came with the kit came with a gasket. I'm not going to use the gasket. I'd rather have the sealer. But because mine already has these shift rails on it, I'm going to have to install my shift forks. The kit did also come with new pads for the shift forks, so they just pop off and pop back on. The new ones do. But I'm going to go ahead and get these kind of reinstalled in place. This goes in, so I'm going to put it in about like that. This goes up. This extra shaft right here goes this direction, closer to the front. So I'm going to stick it, get it into this. There. Rotate it down. Now, again, we got bearings that are about to be sealed up. I'm going to just put a little splash of oil on them, just so they're pre-lubed. And now the tricky part. The problem is, it's just gotta all line up. You gotta have this up high enough so it's aligned up. You gotta have the rods so that they're going straight into the shift forks, and then you gotta have the shift forks where they're just this far one over here has got to be forward a little bit. There's a groove in this back one. You gotta line all that up. There we go. Oh, there it goes. Oh, there we go. All right, so, man, that stuff's got to line up just right. All right, and the forks aren't quite lined up yet, but I want to get these screws in just to hold this in place. And then we'll adjust those shift forks. Okay, again, those were 35 foot-pounds. And now we'll work getting these shift forks slid over a little bit. And really, it's going to move these clutch sleeves over. Get them to line up. There's that one. Okay, I got those shift forks. I got them in line with the holes where they'll be set into these shift rails. And so I went ahead and pulled the shift pin out, this locking pin back out. because I do want to get some thread locker on it, so they will not come loose. I'll get these tightened up. These get tightened up to 14 foot-pounds. We'll get that done and we'll be right back. All right, so now we're going to check the end play on this front input shaft, and it's got end play, which is good, but we want to be between 1 and 5 thousandths. So I put the nut on here, and what we're going to do is we're going to seat that bearing that's down at the bottom. We're going to set in all those shims. We'll get all that to seat right. Dial my 0 in. Let's see, let me tighten this nut down, make sure I don't want that nut to turn. I want to set this to 0. Right there. Okay, there's our 0. Then I'm going to come up underneath this gear, just lift up, see how much. I'm going to just take and rotate this thing just to have it lift up. Oh wow, we got a bunch. We got 20 thousandths. Okay, so what that means is on this back side of that plate we put on a little while ago, where we got that race that can go in and out, that race is too far away, meaning we got too many shims underneath this plate. We got to take away about 18 thousandths of a shim. So we'll pull all those shims back out, remeasure them, pull out the ones so that we have the remaining thickness, and then put it back together and do another test. Okay, so after adjusting some of those shims, tap this down, got that set to 0, and now I can bump it up, and we're right at 3 thousandths. That's right in the middle of the spec of between 1 and 5. So we are in perfect tolerance there. Alright, final step on this front side is going to be putting in the yoke. We're going to use the old original Spicer yoke because we'll have we'll use the standard drive shaft for there. Set that on, make sure you put your washer. There we go. 120 foot-pounds. Alright, next we're going to get this intermediate gear installed, and what we got to do is we're actually going to build like a bearing set for this. Here's the original shaft, and the shaft is stationary in the case. It does not move. We got a new shaft with the kit. But ultimately, first thing we're going to do is inside this housing here is we're going to build all the roller bearings. And it looks kind of like this, where you got a washer, you got a row of bearings, these needle bearings go around, this center spacer, another row of bearings, and then this end spacer here. You got these 2 end caps that actually go inside there as well, that actually sit on the outside of this piece. So, interestingly, we did get 2 new of these pieces, came with the kit. What was interesting is the kit gave me 3 of these smaller ones, but not the wider ones, so that didn't quite make sense. And actually these aren't as thick this way as these, so these don't have much, there's not much wear on this type of stuff, so I'm going to reuse all 3 of these. I'm not going to install these. It doesn't seem like that would be a good a solution as going back with these. These are a little bit thicker than, obviously we're missing that one. So, it also says that when installing these, you can use petroleum jelly. So I'm actually going to use petroleum jelly to get these all installed into that. Let's see if we can get that kind of started. Take this center one and push that in. Then we're going to start laying. petroleum jellies kind of act like a glue. We're going to need that when we drop this in the case to hold these in place before we push that shaft in. Okay, that side, I'm going to do the same. I'm going to turn this over and do the same on this side. And then we'll get ready to push this thing in. Okay, so that assembly is now ready. There's our bearings, needle bearings in there. Now we're going to drop this thing in the case. Alright, first thing we need to do is put in these thrush washers. They go on either end, and it talks about using some of this petroleum jelly as glue. These guys have this little tab on here, and so that's going to keep it from rotating. And there's a little slot down there. I'm going to put this tab right into that slot. Okay. And the other thing I've done is I've actually got this, I've shifted my shift forks so that both these outer gears are free play. And that way this thing will drop in and the gears can do what they need to do. Okay, so that's in, and then we need the shaft to go in from this side. Alright, I'm going to hammer this little flat place is where that my little locking plate's going to go, so I need to make sure it's rotated that direction. And we're going to hammer this in. It's going to push that seal really tight. The weird problem is, they don't mention, is there's no seal on this side. And I just think that's really odd. So what I'm going to do is, before this gets pushed in any further, I'm actually going to put some seal on that. Just a thin layer. That's where stuff's going to leak out, you know. Whatever gets pushed out, and it's not needed, but it doesn't make sense not to have that section sealed. Why would you put a O-ring on this side but nothing on this side, other than the fact that you can't install it? So. Okay, so we drove that in far enough so that this bottom flange down here, this little shelf, was even with the case, so that the locking mechanism has something to go into, and also it'll go into that little sleeve. And then one thing you're going to notice when you drive this in is it looks like your O-ring's coming off, but what happens is it's just shearing off what it doesn't need. So it's going to create a nice tight fit on this side. So that's going to be just kind of a throwaway. Next we're getting our locking plate and our we're going to put our tags on there and the locking plate. Like that. Click. Yeah, that's good enough. Alright, so that's all done, and just to kind of double check, it all spins very nice. It's in neutral again, so I have to spin it with this thing. But yeah, that's all, nothing binding. That seems really good. Next, we're going to get all this stuff buttoned up, and we'll be done. Alright, before we button this thing up, we're actually going to put a little bit of, we're going to just oil these gears down a little bit, just so we don't put this thing away dry. So this new kit came with a gasket. We're going to put sealant on both sides, you know, gasket maker on both sides of this little gasket, and then we'll get this thing all buttoned up. Alright, now we're going to install all these bolts. We're going to put some Loctite on them to seal them. There's only one of the bolt holes that's open through to the case, and it's this one right here. But it doesn't make sense not just to go ahead and seal these up, make sure these don't come out. Alright, so next I want to put back in my speedo gear. I went ahead and lubed that up a little bit. I'll push it in, it goes all the way in. That far. Just got a little gasket on that side. Okay, so after that's installed, I can turn this and see that centerpiece spinning, and there's no, that seemed to be working fine. Fine, so let's now spin over. We're going to now do these two pieces. Remember, this little piece right here was this little aluminum cap. That's very lightweight aluminum. Okay, that should be good enough. It's got that little rubber O-ring on the bottom. And then here is our four-wheel drive switch. Little plunger switch. It goes right here. There shouldn't be any oils up this high, so I'm not going to lubricate this. Okay. The last little piece we got to do is on my shift rails. There's this piece right here, and it goes on upside down, or what looks like upside down, like that. We got these two pins. Alright, so the only cotter pin I've got that'll fit in that little hole is this little bitty cotter pin, and you put that in there and you spread it apart, whatever, but that just doesn't seem substantial. So instead of that, I'm going to use, this is called a hairpin. It came in a kit. I don't know where I bought this. Dorman value pack. It's got a bunch of different little accessory pieces, but it's got cotter pins and hairpins. This one here is a lot thicker. I'll be using this, and that'll last a lot longer. There's not much stress on these. There's really no stress, but I think that right there is a lot better off. There, and the same thing on this side. Alright, so again, when I bought this transfer case, it only came with this pivot arm as well as this shift lever. And I'm going to flash up a picture of the diagram that came in the service manual so you can see what I'm just trying to replicate. And if I got this completely wrong and you're familiar with this, I would more than love to hear from you. But so what I'm going to do right now is actually go ahead and put this this guy back in here, and it's got to come out a little bit like that. This like this. I'm going to put a washer on here, and I bought this nylon lock nut. There's plenty of thread to get into the nylon portion. So we're going to tighten that thing up. Okay, so that's just kind of snug. And I don't care if this rotates on the shaft or the shaft rotates into this housing. It's going to allow us to shift. But that takes the wiggle out of it. And then on this side, the diagram showed a flat washer, a spring washer, and a flat washer. I can't find a spring washer for now, so I'm going to put enough washers, or I bought 3. I hope that's enough. And actually the way it sits, it's going to be, there's 3 washers and then a cotter pin, which does resemble the diagram. And I think it's going to have to need something else, but let me start with that, see how that works. In fact, it needs to be mounted. Let me get this. And it'll be something like that I go with, unless I find something else. I'll probably put something else in here to tighten this side up. I don't want this to be, to completely loose. Maybe some more washers, maybe a washer between here. But we're gonna get that tightened up. All right, we got it back together, and when I look in my parts bin, there are no extra parts, so I must have done something right. You know, it's not that difficult of a piece to do. And let me start by saying I am not a transmission expert, a transfer case expert. This is the first one I've ever opened up. I did a lot of research before I started this project. Looked at a lot of videos, a lot of documentation, marked up documentation, kind of got prepared for it. And it's just something I felt that I could do. And this video, probably the first reason I would put this video together, this video series together, first of all, is just document what we're doing. Me and my son Spencer are having a really good time kind of working on a Jeep restoration, and that's what this is going to go in. And we're just trying to document what we're doing as we go along and sharing it with people. A couple people, I greatly appreciate all of my followers who watch the video just because they like watching the entire project, as well as I'm sure there's going to be people that watch this video series on this transfer case thinking, wonder if this is something you can do or not. And the idea would be to watch this video, and there's other videos on the internet that you can watch to get familiar with it and decide, is this something that's above your pay grade or something that you think you can do? Do you have some of these tools? The arbor press I've had for quite a while, and some of the bearing pullers. The only thing that I had to physically, I didn't have was a torque wrench that went up to 140 pounds. But my local O'Reilly's, luckily, they have a loaner program, and I was able to go over there and actually borrow that tool from them for free. You put a deposit down and you take it back. So, you know, all that's kind of neat. So, again, I appreciate all my followers. If you like detailed videos kind of like this, I've got one of the engine. It's a 5.3 GM LM7 engine that's going to go into a 1979 Jeep CJ7. I got a whole series on rebuilding that engine. I've got a series on how to rewire, you know, turn it into your wiring harness into a 4-wire harness. That was pretty successful videos. A lot of people enjoying that, as well as the transmission that's going to go in front of this is an Asen Warner AX15, and I completely tore that apart and rebuilt it as well. I got a series on that. So, you know, not next, but soon, I will put together a series of exactly all the components that's going to glue all that together. The engine, that transmission, and this transfer case, how that, we're going to mock that up on the floor and see how all that stuff goes together. I'm kind of excited about that. I've got a few of the pieces. I need to do a little more research and then source out a couple more pieces. I don't have the bell housing yet. So as soon as I get all that stuff sourced and in-house, we'll start planning that video. So, you know, past several weeks, several nights, I've been spent actually researching everything about the suspension, all the new suspension components that I'm going to need to go under my Jeep. So that'll be coming soon as well. So anyway, I hope you enjoy the video, and if you like these type of videos, if you want to follow along, you know, hit the subscribe, and then you got the bell notification that'll give you an alert when a new video comes up. But until then, we'll see you next time.
Jack it up.